has to be clicked?
No, I think if you did.
Oh, then you have to hit resume recording.
Yes.
Yeah, I did that. Namaste everyone. Let's see, the volume here is okay? Yes. Harihi Om. Yes, looking forward to a wonderful day. Very nice. Me too. Namaste. Vidya has class. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinnavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Mansions in the mind. Continuing with our discussion. Sometimes it's not mansions, it's just a small little cave. Yeah, dank and filled with waterlogged and full of prickly stalactites, stalagmites of doubt and despair, bats of confusion, going around, round and round. And so sometimes it's like that. So the mansions are not always very elaborate. Sometimes they are just, very ignominious, not fun. And then sometimes it's not a mansion at all. It's a thicket. It's a forest. The forest of where the forest springs. Sudden forest. I mean, how hard it is to grow one tree, think about it. Now we are talking of reforestation and everything, how hard it is to grow one tree and nurture it. But this forest springs overnight, no problem. Reforestation galore. And in between the thicket, this jiva appears or appears. And what does the jiva do? Is caught in this thicket. So mansion, that was a nice starting point, but I don't want you to get stuck there. There are many other ways in which the mind, is very, very active. Many other forms of this, build up. We are talking of build up. And so, cave, forest, what else, And sometimes the mansion can be ancestral. An inherited mansion from the parents, from the community, from the culture, from the nation. And this is how we do things. Why? Because this is how we have done it for thousands of years. In Rajasthan, in North India, a state in North India, in certain communities, they have this very strange custom. During the marriage ceremony, right before, the main rounds around the fire are taken, and right before that, you have to bring a cat Okay? To bring a cat and then imprison it under a wicker basket. And along with the Pandit's mantras, this one will also be chanting. Only nasal mantras, The cat repertoire is only nasals, Yamagananam, that's all. That's only nasals, no other, sounds. And maybe some hissing sound, that's all, yeah. So there is sibilants and nasals, that's all. That's all they can do. And then along with the mantras, the Pandits are chanting, cat is also yowling, and then in this highly stressful way, the marriage is completed, the marriage ritual is completed. It's just mind-boggling. And I attended one such ceremony, could not make head or tail of it. I said, why would you put that poor cat through this? And also, why would you put yourselves through this? No, this is how we have done. This is an ancestral mansion. Then upon querying this further, it was perhaps the origin of this was that long time ago, when a marriage was being, solemnized, a stray cat came near the fire. And then they didn't want to disrupt the thing, so they had a flower basket, an empty flower basket, which was upturned and put on the cat in a kind of a stay order. Stay right here, don't come near the fire, don't get hurt and don't disrupt the ceremony. And now it has become, a custom without which the marriage cannot be, completed. This is an example of an ancestral mansion that one keeps nurturing and that one keeps, what's the word for it? What's happening over there? Not working?
One person.
Yeah, ask them to log on here. Yeah. So, this is something which we keep reproducing. So the ancestral mansion is in the form of certain prathas, customs, beliefs, notions, inherited from the foremothers and the forefathers, and they can be country-wise, nationalistic mansions. I do this because I'm American, because I'm English, this is how we are. These are certain ways in which the mind gets caught. And then what else? Familial mansions. Familiar mansions, such as what? Like we hear in the story, in the Shakespeare story, Romeo and Juliet. Things like that. Feuds. And this is what the Bollywood films are also made up of. Two people fall in love and the families hate one another. Yeah, fall is the operative word here. And the families hate one another for centuries, for generations. And if you ask each family, why do you hate each other? They have even forgotten the reason. They don't even know the reason. But they are holding on to that emotion. Trapped in this ancestral mansion of this is how we have done. So, all the things that go to make up one's identity as one knows it, or as one thinks one knows it, becomes the raw material, for this mansion. The bricks, the mortar, the windows, the doors. In fact, most of them don't have windows and doors. That is the problem, because they have a totalizing capacity. As soon as I enter, there is a slamming sound. You check in to the mansion, but you cannot check out. That's why you are checked out most of the time. Spaced out, stifled, claustrophobic. And that's why there is no choice but to study this Upanishad. You see, I'm making a little case over here. Any Upanishad, really. And because, when you look closely at the raw material of the mansion, it has a certain reality, but it is a subjective reality. It is there because I see it. I don't see it because it is there. That was the first kind of reality we talked about, the empirical reality, and this is what my own personal subjective reality. So, bound by my own subjective reality, I am. And so, even though the raw materials seem very real to me, I told you, all antique panels and excavated from the recesses of the memory and the knowledge base and the thoughts of identity, they are just flim flam, they are flimsy. In fact, they are non-existent. But one feels trapped. Help, I'm trapped. How? Where are you trapped? There are no chains, no shackles, no room with a closed door, no bars, no cage, but still the person feels caged. And this feeling is something universal. It's not just a personal feeling. If that is the case, then psychotherapy is needed. But that's not what we are talking about. And then you can have certain disorders, diagnose claustrophobia or fear of closed spaces, agoraphobia, fear of open spaces. All that that's a different thing. But this feeling is ratified because everybody feels it. Everybody feels trapped in this mansion and rattling the door, let me out, let me out. And so because everybody feels it, what happens? It becomes real, it gains a certain reality. It becomes undeniably real, and therefore it becomes something that I cannot overcome, that I cannot surpass. And because everybody is experiencing it at the same time, it also becomes kind of morbidly okay to be universally trapped, individually trapped, but have this be a universal experience of being individually trapped. And so, as a society, as a culture, we devise ways of forgetting that one is trapped through very ingenious methods, from malls to balls. And how do you spell mall? M-A-U-L. Okay, yeah. That which mauls you, if not of your sanity, at least of your pocketbook, of your wallet. Yeah. So you just, find ways. It's all dancing around the problem. And that is one more way. Like that's why I said the balls, cha cha cha. A few steps, just don't step on the landmine. That's all. Around the landmines, cha cha cha. Oh, one more day averted, cha cha cha. One more day gone. Somehow I got through it. And what else do I do? Keep myself so busy that there is no time to even think. Not even just one thought comes into the mind. I just, because the thought is just one more way in which that imprisonment is being made aware. I am conscious of everything, including this feeling of constant imprisonment in the bars or in the cage of my own making. This is what the whole problem is. I am imprisoned or I feel imprisoned, and it's so, distasteful. This notional imprisonment, which is taken to be real, is so distasteful that I want to get out. And so all the, what is that called? Like all the pastimes in the whole world is just that. ways of trying to forget this main problem. Ways of trying to forget. That's all one can do. And then sometimes one is, insincere because one thinks that it is a lasting solution. If I'm permanently busy, it's a permanent solution, right? Wrong. No, but what if I just fly around like a moth and then just drop dead? Well, in the Hindu tradition, that is just a small little slice of time. That's why the individual, who is going through this experience of feeling trapped is called Jiva. Jivati, permanently present. And so comes back in a different shape, different form, different body to experience what? The same experience of feeling trapped. This whole trap, And so therefore what? I told you, you can't breathe it out. Breathe in the feeling of vast expansion. Breathe out the shackle, one link at a time. Feels good, Yeah, you can sit in the meditation pose and say breathe in. People do this. It's some kind of an auto-suggestion. I'm not bound. Breathe in the thought, I'm not bound. Breathe out the thought, I'm boundless. It does not work. It only works for the leader of the meditation who is charging a lot. They have a good life. Works for them. It doesn't work for anybody else because after the meditation what happens? Back to the same, That's why, there is a wish, many happy returns. Birthday wish. Yeah, many happy returns. Meaning what? Back to the same old grind. It's almost a sarcastic wish, many happy returns. No Hindu will say that to another person. For every Hindu, they don't want to come back, and neither do they wish upon somebody else to come back. Many happy returns you should never say. Happy birthday, okay, fine. Many happy returns means what? May you keep coming back to this experience of feeling permanently trapped? No, thank you. There was one very nicely made series, this British series called The Prisoner. Has anybody seen that? Yeah, very nice, wonderful. And it was some kind of a espionage kind of a show where the protagonist would keep finding himself in this kind of a dystopic reality of feeling trapped. And there were characters who were all very nice. As long as you followed the rules, they were very, very nice. And then it was a kind of a totalizing society where at the edge was a seashore, but you could not really go beyond that. There were no ships, nothing. And then one time he escapes. He escapes and he comes back to London. And then somebody helps him escape. He comes back. And then finally he is in and it's a dystopic reality. So somebody has occupied his flat and somehow he just goes there and he sits and he's breathing. Breathe in the freedom. For the first time in so many, many, many decades, he's breathing his free things. And there's a doorbell ringing. And then he opens the door and it's that same nice lady who is, who helped him escape. Helped him escape. And she comes with a big cake and says, many happy returns, time to go back to this dystopic island. That is, that was a very nice allegory of what is happening here. That's why I liked that particular episode. I really liked. And long ago, I think it was made in the 70s. And so, like this, from where we have gone, many happy returns. Yes, so many happy returns. And so that's what this is all about. It's returning to this dystopia, this dystopic reality, which I cannot stand. Why? Because I cannot stand the thought of feeling bound. I cannot handle it. Why? Because it is contrary to my nature. Oh, just because you say it, I have to keep swallowing whatever you tell. You make a few jokes and then it becomes okay. Well, it is contrary to everyone's nature. No, but what if somebody says, I like feeling bound? You just talk to them for 2 more minutes. Maybe they have not understood exactly what is the meaning of bondage, etc. Talk to them for 2 more minutes. It is contrary to my nature. How do you know? That I don't know. That I don't know. How I know? I don't ask me, because it is my nature. It is not my nature to feel like I need elbow room. It's not my nature to feel trapped. It's not my nature to feel trapped in my own perceptions and misgivings. And it is not my nature to feel bound. Oh, then what is your nature? To feel free. When? Right now. For how long? Just 10 minutes. No, forever. It is my nature to feel free forever and ever and ever and ever. In fact, whatever I want, I don't want that particular object. What do I want? I want that forever, which I think to be an object. I superimpose, now let's get very Vedantic just for fun. I superimpose the forever on the not forever. I superimpose the concept of forever on the object, which is by definition finite and cannot be forever. Like the story of the Zen monk who was taking, new students. And the new student, and the rule is, even in the Zen philosophy, the rule is you come with a present. You don't come empty-handed. It's all from the Vedas. Riktapanir na pashyet rajanam daivatam gurum. Do not see empty-handed these 3 categories of people. The king or the head of state. Even if you did not vote for Obama both the times, and you go see him, or you are, about to meet him, something, if you are a Hindu, you will take something. It doesn't have to be expensive, a fruit, a flower, something. And then what? Daivatam, you go to a place of worship, any place of worship, you don't go empty-handed. Even if you've forgotten to bring flowers or fruits, you put some money there. And then Guru, somebody who is a teacher. You don't see empty-handed. So this is what the whole thing is. And so like this, in this story, the new student takes that for the teacher, very carefully selected, after looking into many shops, a fine china tea cup with a lid. What an appropriate present for one who has made sipping tea into an art of mindfulness. That's what the student thinks. Very fitting present. Bone china tea cup. It's called bone china because, like the bone, the china is also subject to osteoporosis. Breaks very easily. You look at it, you frown and look at it, it develops a crack. It's very sensitive. And on this bone china were painted all kinds of things, and then a lid and everything, and he had, carefully packed it in cotton. Why cotton? Because in those days bubble wrap was not available. Simple. In cotton and fabric inside and out, And then he took it and carefully opened it and carefully, with great Shraddha and devout feeling, presented it to the teacher. The teacher did not even take it in the hand. The teacher took one look at it and said, "Why, my son, this is broken." What? I mean, imagine his, he felt broken inside, because to hear from the teacher after carefully packing it, and, he spent 3 sleepless nights while he was journeying to the teacher, all because of this cup. And this cup, and he felt like weeping in the cup because it is broken, it is cracked. The teacher did not even look at it properly, and the teacher said, "This is cracked." And of course he got very defensive. "No, no, master. It is not cracked. I have taken very good care of it. It is not broken." And the teacher insisted it is broken. And like this, back and forth, they went for 2-3 times. And then a seasoned student who had been with the master tapped him on the back and said, "I think this is not going very well. I think your days of shishyahood are going to be numbered if you go on this tack. You need to back off a little bit. You need to, just sit down here, And then it dawned on this newbie, who is a newbie student. On this newbie, it dawned that maybe this is a teaching moment, maybe the class has started. He was just confused because the Sahana Bhavatu mantra was not chanted. Poor thing got confused, that is why. And then so he said, "What do you mean?" Finally, he was ready to learn. And then he thought, "What do you mean?" He said, "What do you mean?" And in the Zen tradition, unlike the Vedanta tradition, you don't talk so much. I like it. It's very nice. It's very easy on the teachers. Because the student has to go do all the work. So that becomes a koan, It is broken because I say it is. That is a Zen koan. Meaning, you have to go and think about it. In fact, that's how it was in the Upanishads also. Bhrigu, the son of Varuna, goes to the father. What's the father's name? You have to be alert, quick. So, Bhrigu goes to his father and says, "Adhihi bhagavo brahma. Oh, revered sir, please be my teacher. You were my father up till now. Please be my teacher and teach me about Brahman." And then, a cryptic statement, cryptic but very clear in certain ways, and cryptic if you don't understand it. The answer was given very happily. What was the answer? "Yato va imani bhutani jagante, yena jatani jivanti, yat prayanti abhisamvishanti, tat vijignyasasva tad brahmeti." What is Brahman? A definition is given, that which is the cause of the universe, out of which all this has come, all the elements and the elementals have come, by which all that is here is sustained, unto which everything goes back and is resolved. That is Brahman. Go think about it. Vijignyasasva. Go desire to know it. Go somewhere. Don't sit here. Go away. And contemplate on this. And he contemplates on this. Unfortunately, he had approached his father before lunch. And then he goes and sits in a corner and thinks, "What is Brahman? What is Brahman?" And then some divine noises come out. Kuru 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 kuru. Gastric juices announcing lunchtime. There's a bell ringing in the stomach. Kuru kuru kuru. And then all he can think of is food. The word for food in Sanskrit is annam. Annam. And then suddenly a torch lights up Can't say light bulb because it was ancient times. And suddenly a torch lights up. And then what does it say? Of course, the answer is very clear. Because without food for 5 minutes of contemplation, what has happened to me? I think I have lost weight. And continued like this, I will just die. Not only me, everything dies. Because everything depends upon food, is sustained by food. But wait a minute. How did I come into being? I came into being because my parents were eating food. Yes, Annam. So the cause of me and my birth, Annam, I am sustained by, it is known very clearly now. You know, the stomach is beating a drum now, marking time. Annam, and then what? Deprived of Annam, what happens? I go back. To what? Well, if I am cremated, the ashes go back to the earth and nourish, become the kind of the soil stabilizer for another field of Annam. And so he comes, armed with this answer. Annam Brahmeti Vyajanat. He understands all this is Annam alone, Annam. And then what happens? And then he comes to his father proudly and says, Annadhi eva khalu imani bhutani jayante annena jatani jivanti annam prayanti abhisamvishanti. And then, Varuna throws cold water on his conclusion. He looks at him and says, doesn't say you are wrong. He says, you need to go think about this again. So that actually was the tradition. That was the culture for us also. But now, being Kali Yuga, if I send away people saying, you need to go think about this, nobody will come back. Point one. And even if they come back, there will be all kinds of wrong notions. Correct? Yeah. And very entrenched wrong notions, which is what all these two classes about the Upanishad have been about, well entrenched wrong notions in the form of concrete mansions in the mind, in the Antahkarana. So now back to our story. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten. So he was asked to go and think about it. But due to some, he was on the right track, due to some punya, some grace, he understood what the teacher meant. That even before it is broken, it is as good as broken. Why? Because that is its destiny. Maybe not now, maybe not, 10 years later, and maybe it is a lucky cup, a cup that had done a lot of punya, and ended up in a museum of the artifacts of the Ming dynasty. Possible. Some Chinese, display somewhere. And also it has, it's got Raja Yoga, the cup, because it's a traveling exhibit. It goes to Spain, it goes to New York, from there it goes somewhere else. It is just all, and still it is not broken. But still that is its destiny, correct? Breakage is its destiny. And so too for all the objects in the universe upon which I rely, upon which I depend. For what? To take away varaya, to remove this feeling of entrapment, to distract myself permanently from this notion of bondage, I rely upon the impermanent. What a travesty. What a travesty. And if this is not enough, that becomes yet one more mansion. A belief that this is the only way. A dogged belief that this is the only way I can do this. No other way. And this becomes a further cause of the snares tightening. This is what the whole problem is. The problem now, if we can just summarize, is a subjective problem. It's a problem, it's a subjective problem because it is not ultimately real. It is not ultimately real because even as I feel entrapped, I reject that I am entrapped. I cannot make peace with this entrapment because if this entrapment was real, if this was my own nature, we would all be happy sitting in our mansions. But we are not. One is not happy feeling bound. One wants to feel free. And this goes beyond the human existence. Although we are only talking about human beings, nothing, you catch a butterfly, it will struggle. Children, go and catch the wings. It will not just say, oh, okay, where are you going to take me? What are you going to do with me? No. It will struggle to be free. You catch anything, other than a pumpkin. That's why we can eat vegetables. You catch anything, it will struggle to be free. It will struggle for its life. That itself shows that this catching, this feeling of being caught, whether it's a fish or a bird, two-legged, no-legged, winged, things that crawl, snake, scorpion, etc., everything people eat, snakes, scorpions, etc., things that fly, things that swim, things that walk, anything you catch, it will struggle, it will run away. It sees you and runs away. It knows. Predator, it knows. It's almost as though the person chasing it has the word predator stamped on the forehead. It knows. And that's why defenseless animals like these insects, small insects, the fly, you don't even want to kill the fly. You want to just escort it and put it out of your house. That's why it's called house fly, that which only flies in the house. Yeah. And so you go slowly like this. The fly is over here, you are going like this, it flies away. It can see. It has excellent peripheral vision. 360-degree vision. So this is not my nature. This feeling of entrapment, if it was real, then I would not be struggling. But I am not struggling. Sit quietly for one day and then come back to me. We'll have a conversation. It appears as though one is not struggling because one has mastered the art of insulating this mansion from all disasters, weather-related disasters. You have bought one insurance policy that is keeping you going. That's all it is. That's why you're able to weather the situation. But whether or not it is real, in order to ascertain that, you let go of these insurance policies, just sit down quietly without doing anything. Why one day? 1 hour you sit down and get back to me. That is the struggle. You can see this even in the airports. You go to the airport where people are waiting for the flights, they will always be doing something. Munching, and then, reading something, talking to each other, pacing, nervously looking at their belongings. Nobody is interested in your bag, okay? Yeah. But yet people just want to, clutch and, especially elderly people, some insecurity, clutch and make sure everything is all okay. And once I saw the person talking to himself, and got louder and louder. I was about to call somebody, and then I saw something sticking out of the head, little bit, just 2 inches out of the ear. Wasn't an antenna, looked like it. What is that? Blue tooth. Why the tooth is blue and what is it doing in your ear? Those are discussions not pertinent to the here and now. What is pertinent here is to understand the fact that there is this problem. And what is this problem? This feeling of entrapment. And therefore there is this struggle for all beings, but especially enhanced and amplified in the case of the human being, because I am free enough. It's like I'm conscious of myself, I'm conscious of everything else. It's almost as though Mother Maya, when she made the human being, she filled this human being with complete self-consciousness, uninhibited self-consciousness, as a result of which uninhibited possibilities of making any mistake centered on what the I is. Because the I is, like I said last night, partially known, wholly unknown. And so the mistake is repeatedly made, and that mistake is handed down from generation to generation in the form of parental advice. Don't trust anybody, make lots of money, don't give away your money, you need it for yourself, charity begins at home, all these things. These are pieces of advice coming from the parampara. Here we can talk about this ajnana parampara. From this parampara of ignorance, self-ignorance, and all the people who have ascribed to or subscribed to this self-ignorance, and small ways of just, making themselves feel safe, is handed down from generation to generation. What does it do? It just coats the problem, puts a band-aid on an open wound that has not healed, since time immemorial. And no matter what you put on this wound, it's not going to heal. Why? Because it's a subjective wound. Because if the wound is real, real means that which can never go away, it will always be an open sore, a sight for sore eyes. But then, if it is, but when you try to fix it, it is unreal. If it is real, it cannot be fixed. If it is unreal, what am I trying to fix? What am I trying to remedy? What am I trying to soothe? One is caught in this kind of a dilemma. And so this subjective perception, which is the fruit of self-ignorance. I'm just summing up what we have studied so far, what we have talked about. First, we saw that there is this subjective, universal subjective perception centered on the I, which leads to wrong conclusions about the I, as in what? I am unacceptable to me. Self-non-acceptance, self-criticism, self-judgment, fear, sorrow, feeling of bondage. All this is the fruit of, misperception, missed perception. And then, in order to stave off the struggle arising from the missed perception, as a society and culturally, we have found ways to make this work. By becoming workaholics, by becoming, so disenchanted from oneself and from everything that stands for oneself, from making it a habit to not at all think about the self, by being completely immersed in the non-self, nonsense, and then and we have ratified this culturally and validated this so that on the face of it there is a veneer that this is a happy society and there are no problems. And this misperception cannot be but corrected. There is only one thing to do with the misperception. Supposing you have you have a wrong understanding. Let's say, you think when you put a pencil in the water, what happens? Bends. Because of the refraction of the light rays, there is appears bent. Correct? You put the pencil in the water, this piece of wood appears bent. How to straighten it out? You take it out of the water. No. While in the water, how to straighten it out? I think I'll do some yoga. Maybe if I stand on my head and look at it, it will be better. No? I think I'll do down dog, downward facing dog. Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog pose. Easy for the dog. You try doing it. All the muscles you never even knew you had will advertise their presence. And so you did, 10 sun salutations, Surya Namaskaras, and what happened? Did the pencil become straight? No. What needs to be straightened is my knowledge, not the pencil, because the pencil is not bent. It gives the appearance of being bent, as the physicists will tell you, when the light rays pass through this certain kind of viscosity like water, etc. So the volume, the mass, and so all these things, the behavior of light as it passes through various substances, all these things, all these factors give rise to a distorted perception of the pencil, which is not really bent. So basically, I don't have to go shopping when the pencil is bent in order to make it straight. I don't have to do yoga. I don't have to go take up an extra job. I don't have to do anything except appreciate that this is an apparition. It's an apparent reality. And neither do I have to take a hammer and straighten out the pencil. So too the antidote for self-confusion, so too the antidote for the misperception, the mistake and the mistakes centered on the self is self-knowledge. That's all it is. Very simple. It's like those elephant jokes. So simple. How do you tranquilize a blue elephant? How do you tranquilize?
The blue elephant tranquilizer gun.
You have to have a blue elephant tranquilizer gun. Very simple. But then don't ask the next question. What is the next question? How do you tranquilize the white elephant?
Paint the blue elephant.
Paint the white elephant blue and then use the blue elephant tranquilizer gun. It's as simple as the first one, not the second one, okay? Second one is just for fun. The first one illustrates what I'm saying. So the problem is self-ignorance. The antidote is self-knowledge. I don't know why people have a problem with this. No, but that is so fanatic. Why, I have to study Vedanta? Because Vedanta is that solution to this missed perception. But why can't I get the same out of Anuloma, Viloma, Pranayama, alternate nostril breathing? We have to go back to our early breathing exercise. What did we start off with today? Breathe out the bondage, breathe in the freedom. What happened? Nothing happened. Got a headache because too much sudden fresh air going into the head. Not used to it. Oxygen overload. This is so simple that the problem is not real. If the problem is real, then something has to be quote unquote done about it. This is not a problem of doing. The problem is in my seeing. I feel bent out of shape because I am drowning in the water of samsara. Simple. Like the pencil, which is drowning in water, appears bent. I am also appearing bent because I am nimagnaha, drowning, immersed in this nonsensical waters of, missed perception, wrong thinking, fears and drowning in my own tears of missed identity, wrong identity. And therefore the light rays of knowledge, who knew that you could milk so much out of that example? Yeah. Therefore the light rays of knowledge, even if they are trying to reach me, will all appear distorted and I will reject it outright. I don't want it. Why? Because this cannot help me. So what will you go after? Somebody, save me, glub, glub, glub. I am drowning. And each time somebody says, save me, there are enough opportunistic fellows waiting, swimming like those black triangles in the comic books. I will save you. You just need lot of vairagya. Oh, I'm ready to do anything. What do I do? Give me all your money. You are saved. So they will appoint themselves as your savior. Yet one more wrong turn. Yet one more detour. Yet one more life gone. This desire to be saved is so overwhelming that bends the light rays of knowledge coming straight at you. My own resistance, my own fears that I have mounted, my own mansions that I have created to block this Shastra light, the Shastric light. So I continue to be in my misperceptions and in a permanent, so to speak, dystopia of ill-being. What to do? Punya has to come. Somehow, some grace has to come. And therefore, one of the first qualifications for this study is to straighten out the mind, hammer it out, straighten it out, straighten out my thinking. Be in a place of receptivity called Shraddha. Be willing to take a chance. You have tried everything. Has anything helped? No. That's why I'm also not willing to try this. Well, what do you lose? What do you have to lose? And like Karl Marx said, unfortunately in a different context, what did he say? Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose except your chains. That's what it is. What do you have to lose here? Except these shackles, my own shackles of wrong thinking about I. Other than that, what is there to lose? Why not take the chance? Oh, but it is so scary, it is so uncomfortable, it is so difficult. It's not difficult. In fact, that's the only solution. Antidote is self-knowledge. And the problem is self-ignorance, which gives rise to what? All these doting notions of bondage that we keep, nurturing. And this has to be dropped. And the agent that helps us drop it is the Shastra. Shasanat rayate iti Shastram. That which protects upon teaching. And also known here as the Upanishad. We saw the derivation yesterday. That now we see the meanings come out very, very clearly. What are the meanings here? Visharati, that which dissipates what? All these notions, the waters of samsara, the subjective perceptions that occlude my vision and deprive me of the truth of myself as a being of contentment. As a being who is all content all the time. In other words, as a timeless being who is all contentment. That vision is deprived, which is somewhat known, but it is completely deprived by these waters of notions that stand in for the reality. They masquerade and take me away from the truth. So the self-knowledge is a powerful antidote. What does it do? Visharati, dissipates, Well, the fog also dissipates in the light of the sun, but then it comes back the next day. No, avasadayati, removes forever. Because you cannot deny, once you know, you cannot deny you don't know it. You think of anything. Once you know, you cannot feign ignorance. You may say, I forgot, but that has to do with objects. But what about the subject that is not based on memory? If I say, are you here? You don't say, yes, I remember. Yes, I remember I'm here. Oh, I forgot that I'm here. The remembering and forgetting doesn't come into the picture because the I is not based on memory. Memory is based on I. Simple. If I say, are you here? You say, yes, I know. You don't say, I remember. And so, this I is a subject of confusion and has to be clarified properly. Therefore, self-ignorance, the antidote for self-ignorance is self-knowledge, which is called the Upanishad Visharati and then removes forever, avasadayati. But all these are kind of things which it removes, it takes away. What does it actually do? These are all negative definitions of the Upanishad. Therefore, the final definition, Brahma Gamayati, leads me back to the glory of myself, leads me back to assimilate the glory of this vision, which is none other than myself. And that is what the Upa means. It reveals the subject matter that is close to me. What is close? Closest, which is myself. It is closest to me. And definitely, some other people, give the meaning of the word Upanishad as Upa, sitting near the teacher. And like that. That is also okay, but this is much more appropriate. This is what we have received in the teaching tradition, and this is what we teach. So therefore, this is the only solution. So we can spend our time, starting now, wondering if there are other solutions. And going on a wrong scent, misguided scent. Sometimes what happens, they have these bloodhounds. These bloodhounds are keen animals. Like, let's say an offender has been shot while running away and has left behind a few drops of blood and has run away. You just take a handkerchief or a piece of cloth and make it sniff this dog. And you better have very strong shoulder muscles, because it's going to take off with you in tow, because it doesn't know the meaning of procrastination. It doesn't say, I think I'll enjoy a bone and then aram say we'll see what this it is. It is programmed to just rush, and you just have to go behind it. Hot in pursuit, it goes, and it doesn't stop until it finds this fellow hiding somewhere, this useless fellow, until it doesn't stop till it finds the target. And that is how every heart, every mind is like a bloodhound, and moksha. It is hardwired for moksha, for this freedom. Moksha is this opposite of this feeling of bondage. Moksha is the truth of me, which is a siddha vastu. It is already there, it is accomplished. I have to learn it, I have to understand it, I have to comprehend it and assimilate the fact that even though I feel imprisoned in this building of my own notions, in the scaffolding of my own notions, I am still free. I am unafflicted. This is what I have to understand. So Brahma Gamayati, like the bloodhound, it takes you back to Brahman. And then that's why I said one can go with the journey and ready, set, go, starting now. Or one can keep wandering like a misguided bloodhound, because the bloodhound has to be very carefully raised. certain things it should not be allowed to smell, because then it gets confused what it is after. So sometimes if the offender who has run away has a friend and gives it something else to eat, and the poor bloodhound is all confused, and the officer behind it is saying, canine officer is saying, please go, come on, what happened? Lost the scent. Another life, another jiva, lost the scent. And you know what? The truth is, everyone has come to this class or any Vedanta class after having lost the scent many lifetimes, like the misguided bloodhound that missed the target again and again and again and again and again. And finally, this is one more opportunity. The smell of moksha is in the air. What are we waiting for? Let's go. When? After the break. We'll take a 10-minute break, 5-10 minutes break, just to have some fresh air and then come back. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Not bad, the timing is perfect. Okay, so just take a 10-minute break, don't go away, come back. I made sure everyone will come back.